You know, sometimes late at night, I'm just chilling at the bottom of the fish tank, and all I can think about is the students that are struggling with math right now.
Why is this math so difficult? How do I start doing this question?
And then I realized, the humans need me. As the ultimate superior life form, today I'm gonna cover all of the Sec 2 topics so that you too can become a big brain axolotl like myself.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, of course. No more struggling in math because soon you're gonna be flexing on your teacher by putting that easy game on the back of your test paper. So welcome to the ultimate guide to Sec 2 math. Inequalities are just like the Pac-Man dude. This inequality sign here means less than because the left side is the small part of the Pac-Man's mouth, and this means larger than because it's the bigger part of the Pac-Man's mouth. When we add a small line below the inequality sign like this, it reads less than or equals to. So this right here reads x less than or equals to 5, and it means that the value of x is 5 or less. So x values like 5, 4, 3 fulfills this inequality. To solve an inequality like this, for now you can just treat this less than sign like how you do with an equal sign. So the first step is to cross multiply these two fractions, and we can expand out these brackets over here. Now let's combine all the x terms together on one side and all the numbers onto the other side, and we get negative 28x greater than negative 14. Now we want the coefficient of x to be positive, and this is the most important thing you need to know for this topic. In order to convert this negative 28x to a positive 28x, we need to flip the inequality sign. So multiplying negative 1 to both sides, it becomes 28x less than 14. Now dividing both sides, we can get the final answer of x less than 0.5. Finally, after drawing out the number line, we can put an unshaded circle and point to the left side because it represents values that are less than 0.5. This question looks very similar to the previous one, except that there are two inequality signs here. So we need to split them up into two equations. The first equation is basically the left inequality like this, and then the right inequality like this. Now we solve both of these inequalities using the same method as before, and we get our answers of x less than 10 and x greater than or equals to 2/3. Now let's draw a number line to help us out with part B. And since these two inequalities are talking about this region over here, where x is greater than 2/3 but less than 10, then the integers will be 1, 2, 3 and all the way up to 9, because 10 is not counted, because x has to be less than 10. Expanding is kind of like a networking event where everyone is trying to get to know each other. So for this question, the x wants to get to know both this 2x and the minus 8. So x times 2x gives us 2x squared, and also x times minus 8 gives us minus 8x. Now this minus 2 over here needs to also get to know the 2x and the minus 8. So we do the same, and after a bit of simplifying, we get our final answer here. There are also some other kinds of special expansions, where the first is a plus b squared, where if you write it as a plus b 2 times and use the method just now, you get a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. The same can be done with a minus b squared, and instead of plus 2ab, it's minus 2ab. Now the last one is a plus b times a minus b. When we do that, the expansion that we can see that minus ab and the plus ab here will cancel out, which gives us the final answer of a squared minus b squared. One sneaky way this can be used is if the question asks you to factorize something that looks almost like the a squared minus b squared form. So for this question, let's rewrite 4x squared as bracket 2x squared, since the square root of 4 is just 2 and the square root of x squared will just be x. So let's do the same for 9y squared to get bracket 3y squared, and we are ready to use the special formula over here. So a in this case is 2x and b is 3y. So following the form of a plus b times a minus b, we get our final factorization of 2x plus 3y times 2x minus 3y. A quadratic is basically when there is an x squared, x, and a constant term. The most important thing you need to do is check that the coefficient of the x squared term needs to be positive. And since all of these terms can be divided by 2, let's factorize out a negative 2 from everything. Okay, The legit method to do this is kind of like this box method that all the schools teach. But since I'm like the laziest axolotl around, let me teach you my cheat calculator method. I know that every calculator model is kind of different, but for mine is mode 33, and you can get to this screen over here. Now you're gonna type in the coefficients of x squared, x and the constant term into the calculator, and you can get the values of x is equals to 4 or x is equals to negative 3 over 2. Now you're gonna try to shift everything to the left side. So for this, it becomes x minus 4 is equals to 0. Now for this one, we don't want to see any fractions, so we have to multiply both sides by 2, and shifting the minus 3 over to the left side, it becomes 2x plus 3 is equals to 0. Now the final factorization is just putting these two brackets together, and we are done. For simplifying, whenever you see something divided by a fraction like this, you always want to convert the divide into a times by flipping this fraction over here. So now the top can multiply the top, and the bottom can multiply the bottom, and we get something like this. Now we can start cancelling out terms. So let's cancel out 1a from this a square and the a, so only the top will be left with a. The last step is to simplify the fraction. So using the help of our calculator, we press in 84 over 30, and it will become the final answer of 14a over 5b squared. Combining two fractions are just like two people trying to become best friends. So let's say this guy here plays Valorant, and this guy over here plays League of Legends. To become best friends, they need to learn how to play each other's game. So for this question, we are going to try to make both of these denominators the same. So for this fraction over here, he needs to learn how to play his other friend's game. So we multiply the top and the bottom by 3x minus 1. And similarly for this fraction, he also needs to learn his friend's game, so we multiply both the top and the bottom by 2x minus 3. We can then combine the fraction and take note that this negative sign over here needs to be expanded out to the 2x and the minus 3. And after some simplification, we can get our final answer like this. For this question, the trick to combining these two fractions is to notice that this 4 minus x here looks very similar to the x minus 4 over here. So let's factorize out a negative from here, and we can actually change it to become x minus 4. Now let's shift this negative sign out to become a positive here, and now we are ready to combine the fractions. To make the denominator the same, we need to multiply this fraction here by x minus 4 to the top and the bottom. Now we can add these two fractions here together, and after some simplifying, we can get our final answer. Making the subject of formula is just like Mario rescuing the princess from the castle or something. So for this question, our goal is to rescue the x out of all these things to make it x is equals to something. To get rid of this square root over here, let's square both sides, and let's get rid of the fraction by multiplying both sides by x squared minus a. Now after expanding, let's rearrange it so that all the x terms are on one side and everything else is on the other side. Now let's factorize out this x squared and divide both sides by y squared minus 1. Okay, finally, now we are getting something close to the x is equals to something form. The last step is to square root both sides, and remember when we square root both sides, we have to put a plus minus sign over here because there's actually two solutions. Simultaneous equations are kind of like two equations, and you want to solve for the values of x and y. One way to solve it is to actually draw out the lines for these two on a graph, and the x and y coordinates of the point of intersection between them is actually the answer. But if you're a lazy axolotl like me who doesn't want to draw a graph, you can actually solve it using algebra. The first step is to choose the equation that looks simpler, and we make either the x or the y the subject of formula. We choose equation 2 because it looks simpler, and we manipulate it to look like this to get y is equals to half minus 3x, and let's call this equation 3. Now what we're going to do is we're going to sub this equation 3 into the equation we haven't used, which is equation 1. Now the y value here gets replaced with half minus 3x. After doing some expansion and simplifying to solve for x, we get the value of x is equals to 3 over 2. In order to solve for y, we can actually take this x is equals to 3 over 2 and put it inside equation 3 to get the value of y is equals to minus 4. And this x and y values here is our final answer. For a quadratic graph, if the coefficient of x squared is positive, it is a smiley face, and when the coefficient is negative, it becomes a sad face. So let's try to sketch out this quadratic graph over here. By substituting all of the x values in to get the corresponding y values, we can actually plot them on the graph. Since the coefficient of x squared is positive over here, this quadratic is a smiley face and it should look something like this. Okay, now imagine this question asks you to solve for this equation over here. It's the same quadratic as before, and the only difference is that it's equals to 0. So this 0 here basically means that if I draw the line y is equals to 0 on the graph, at what x coordinates does the line intersect with the curve? To solve this equation, we need to first factorize this quadratic using the method we learned just now, and equate the stuff inside in these two brackets equals to 0. Now we can solve for x and we get the answers of x is equals to 3 and x is equals to negative half. So the x-intercepts on this graph is negative half and 3. Okay, side note, but sometimes when solving for quadratics, right, you need to reject the negative value if the question says like x represents money or something, which is a value that can't be negative. The line of symmetry is a vertical line like this, is where the graph is symmetrical about these two sides. So we are basically trying to find the center point of these two values over here, and we can just take negative 0.5 plus 3 all divided by 2 is equals to 1.25. So the line here, x is equals to 1.25, is the line of symmetry. The minimum value is this point over here, and it actually occurs at the line of symmetry. So we just sub in x is equals to 1.25 into the original quadratic equation, and we get the value of y is equals to negative 6.125, which is the coordinates of the minimum point. It's time for a bonus question. Looking at this question, I know every last brain cell is screaming out to you to cancel off this x minus 1 and this x minus 1 over here. But it's actually wrong because we are actually going to miss out one of the solutions. What we have to do is we have to move this x minus 1 to the other side and the right hand side becomes 0. Now we just factorize x minus 1 and we solve for the brackets and we get the solutions of x is equals to 1 or x is equals to minus 1. This topic is all about something being either directly or inversely proportional to something else. When y is directly proportional to x squared, it's just like this y and the x squared are side-by-side neighbors with this k value constant between them. So it just becomes y is equals to kx squared. Inverse proportion is just like the y and the x squared being different floor neighbors, with the k value being on top staring down at them. Now that you think of it, this mysterious k value is kind of a stalker. Since y is directly proportional to x cubed for this question, we get the formula of y is equals to kx cubed. Now when they give us values that we can use, the trick is to solve for this k value over here. So let's try to sub in x is equals to 1 over 3 and y is equals to 2 to find the value of k, which works out to be 54. Now our equation becomes y is equals to 54x cubed. The final step is to just sub in x is equals to 1 over 6 and we can get the final answer of y is equals to 1 over 4. Okay, this is probably one of the most difficult O-level questions I've seen for this topic. So let's try to write out the equation first, and you can kind of see that you can't really solve for the value of k because this question doesn't give you the values of f and d to sub in. We know that d is increased by 20%, so for the new value of f, we're gonna replace the value of d with 1.2d. So let's expand out this square here to get f new is equals to k over 1.44d squared. There's kind of like an invisible 1 in front of the k, so let's split apart the fraction like this, and f new is equals to 0.69444k over d squared. Since f is equal to k over d squared, we can actually get the relation that f new equals to 0.69444 times of f. So basically the value of f kind of went from 1 down to 0.69444. So let's put it into our percentage change formula that we learned in the Sec 1 video, and we get the percentage reduction of 30.6%. Let's say we have small Doge and small Doge goes to the gym and becomes big Doge. You can kind of see that they're the same Doge but different sizes. So this idea is actually called similarity. Now imagine we have a Spider-Man over here and he clones himself to create another one. They are the same Spider-Man, same size but just in a different rotation or orientation. This idea is called congruence. If you forget everything, you just have to remember these two memes over here. For two congruent shapes like these, since they are literally the same triangle, all the corresponding sides have the same length and the angles are the same also. The most important and confusing thing about this topic is that ordering matters. So for these two triangles, going from the short length up to the right angle and then to the long end, the triangle ABC is congruent to triangle XYZ. So ABC is congruent to XYZ. When saying that these two angles are the same, angle BCA is from the right angle to the angle then across, so we need to follow the same ordering on the other triangle. So BCA is
equals to
YZX. For this question, we try to draw out the two similar triangles following again the same ordering method so that it's easier for us to see. Because this angle is equal to this angle because of alternate angles, we can sort of break off this triangle at the top and rotate it down over here. For similarity, since one is just an enlarged version of another, kind of like zooming into an image, the corresponding angles are the same. The formula to find the sides is that the ratio of the small over big is equal to small over big. Since we want to find the length of CD, and let's take a look at these two lengths over here. For the bottom length, the small value is 7 over the big value, which is CD, is equals to another pair of 6 over 15. Then we can just solve for CD and the value is 17.5 cm. If you're a Singaporean student, you probably know what OBS is. It's basically like an outdoors adventure camp thingy, and during the land expedition we were given a map and a compass and we had to traverse back to the campsite. At that time, it was the only time where something I learned in school actually applied to real life. So if you don't want to starve to death in the forest, listen up. For a map reading question like this ratio here means that 1 cm on the map is 2 million cm in real life. We want to convert this 2 million in terms of kilometers, so let's divide it by 100 to convert to meters first, and then we can divide by 1000 to convert to km. And we get our ratio of 1 cm is to 20 km. So now we can use this ratio by taking 950 km divided by 20 km to get the map distance of 47.5 cm. To convert the ratio of cm squared to km squared, we first need to take the original ratio over here and to make sure it's the 1:something something form. And here it's already good to go. Now what we can do is we are going to square these two numbers on both sides to get the ratio of 1 cm squared is to 400 km squared. So using this ratio, we can take 330,000 kilometers squared divided by 400 to get the map area of 825 cm squared. To use our best friend Pythagoras' theorem, we first need to identify this thing called the hypotenuse, which is the longest side of a right-angled triangle. So Pythagoras' theorem only works in a right-angled triangle, and we call the hypotenuse C, and we call the other two sides A and B. So the magic formula is A squared plus B squared is equals to C squared. For this question, the hypotenuse over here is C is equals to 13, and we know that A is equals to 5. So let's put both of these into our formula and we shift all the numbers to one side and we get BC squared is equals to 144. After square rooting both sides, technically it kind of becomes plus minus 12, but we can ignore the negative values since the length cannot be negative. The other kind of question is where they give you all three sides of the triangle and ask you to prove whether it's a right-angled triangle. Most students will make the mistake of doing something like, oh, 8 square plus 15 square is equals to 17 square. Ta-da! But it's actually wrong because we can't apply Pythagoras theorem when we don't know if it's a right-angled triangle or not. So what we need to do is we need to evaluate out both sides of the Pythagoras theorem separately. So xy square plus yz square is equals to 8 square plus 15 square equals to 289. So let's evaluate out xz square, which is also equals to 289. Because of these 289s here, we can actually conclude that xy square plus yz square is equals to xz square, which fulfills Pythagoras theorem. So therefore, it is a right-angled triangle based on the converse of Pythagoras theorem. Do you know that axolotls have no teeth and just inhale their food just like Kirby? Oh man, I can't wait to inhale my next McDonald's burger. Since my local pet food store doesn't recommend a diet of McDonald's and coffee for yours truly Axolotl, why not sponsor my daily dose of McDonald's and coffee by sharing this video to McDonald's, and hopefully they'll sponsor all my meals for the rest of my life. Or you can just send it to your 1 IQ friend in your math class. Continuing with our favorite right-angled triangle, let's mark out the hypotenuse and the angle theta over here. Now there's two other terms. The first is the opposite side, where we take this angle and we kind of like cross over to the other end, kind of like crossing the road, and the remaining side is called the adjacent. Okay, so you know how in rock, paper, scissors there's always a different weapon that beats some other weapon? It's basically the same thing for sine, cosine, and tangent, where you gotta remember this acronym called TWACASO, which I have no idea what it actually means. But the first letter represents the trigo function. So S means sine, which is equals to O, which means opposite, over H, which means hypotenuse. And the rest will look something like this. So let's try out an example to show you guys better. For this question, taking reference to the angle theta over here, the first step is to identify the hypotenuse, which is over here, and the opposite, which is across the angle over here, and the last one is the adjacent. So referring to our TWACASO, cosine theta is adjacent over hypotenuse. So we gotta find the hypotenuse using Pythagoras Theorem first. So AB is the square root of 12 square plus 5 square, which is equals to 13. Now cosine theta is just 12 over 13. For part B, to solve for theta, each one of these sine, cosine, and tangent comes with an inverse. So to solve for theta, because cosine theta is 12 over 13, we take the cosine inverse of this 12 over 13 here to solve for theta. So pressing that in your calculator, you will get the final answer of 22.6 degrees. A sphere is basically any type of ball that you can think of. So think of a football, basketball, rugby ball. Okay, maybe not that one. So the radius is the distance from the center of the ball to any point on the surface. The formula for the volume and surface area is actually given in the formula sheet. So volume is equals to 4/3 pi r cubed, and the surface area is 4 pi r squared. For the cone, the formula for the volume and curved surface area is also given in the formula sheet. Okay, but notice here that the h here refers to the vertical height from the center all the way to the top of the cone, and this L refers to the slant height, which is from the edge all the way to the top. Now the trick for cones is to calculate this slant height by drawing this kind of a right-angled triangle over here, and you can use Pythagoras Theorem to solve for either the height or the slant height. For this solid over here, you can see that it's made out of a hemisphere and a cone. So let's start with the cone first, where we are given that the slant height, which is 13, and we need to find the actual height. So let's use our favorite Pythagoras Theorem and we can get the height of 12. Because the radius is 5, the volume of the cone is 1/3 pi r squared times h, which gives us 314.16. For the hemisphere, since it's half of a sphere, the volume is half times 4/3 pi r cubed, which gives us 261.80. The final step is to just add up these two volumes to get the volume of the solid. The last one is a pyramid, and it can come in many forms like this, or this. And this time the formula is not given in the formula sheet. The formula for the volume is very similar to the cone, just that instead of pi r squared, it's the base area. And that depends on what kind of pyramid you get. The h here refers again to the vertical height from the center to the top of the pyramid. The total surface area is when you kind of like open up these sides like a flower and calculate all of them individually. This question gives you a pyramid with a square base of 10 and the edge is 13. To find the volume, we must first find this h value. Since I'm kinda limited to this 2D whiteboard, let's hop onto Minecraft for a second. The secret for this question is to look at this face of the pyramid here and cut it into half, and we can see that we can form a right-angled triangle. Then we can just use Pythagoras to get the slant height. Now let's go inside of the pyramid and we can see another right-angled triangle, and we can use Pythagoras again to get the vertical height. Okay, let's hop back to our 2D world. And as we said, we look at this face and apply Pythagoras to get the slant height of 12. And then we can take a look inside and use Pythagoras again to get the actual vertical height of 10.91. Lastly, we can calculate the base area and put in our volume formula to get the final volume of 364 cm cubed. You know, I'm the only axolotl in this fish tank and sometimes it gets pretty lonely. So I ask around my other axolotl friends to see how many fishes they have in their fish tank. So for my fish tank, there's only one lonely axolotl, so I put a dot above one and I repeat the process with all my friends' responses. So this is called a dot diagram, and it's only useful with a small number of discrete categories, because there are limitations like it being not possible to have 1.5 axolotls. A histogram is kind of like a bar graph, but instead of different classes, now we have class intervals on the x-axis, like 3.0 to 3.2, and again the frequency is on the y-axis. So for example, if I have a GPA like 3.3, I belong to this class over here from 3.2 to 3.4. We use a histogram where the data is continuous, but some drawbacks of the histogram is that we won't really know the individual values of the data. Like for example, the maximum value can be anywhere from 3.4 to 3.6. We don't really know what is the highest GPA here. The last one is probably the weirdest looking one, which is called a stem and leaf diagram. So think of a plant where this number here is the stem and this number here is the leaf. So we join 10 and 2 together to get 102, and this is one data point. For this row, you can see the values are 102, repeated 3 times, 105 and 107. Do you also notice something a little sus about this diagram? This 200 IQ individual is just chilling here, which is me by the way, so far apart from all the peasants in the dataset. So we call this guy an outlier. This kind of why is the graph misleading question has gotten more and more popular in the O-levels over the past few years. And there's usually two kinds. The problem with the first one here is that the y-axis doesn't start from 0. And even though A is $100 and B is $102, it looks like B is way more than A. For the other kind, it's because the area here is not proportional to the amount of money, which again makes people think that B is way more than A. Let's say we have 5 math axolotls that take a test, and here are their test scores, and we can start by arranging them in ascending order. The mode is basically just the score that occurs the most frequently in the dataset, and 37 here appears 2 times while every other score appears only once, so the mode is 37. Mean is just a fancy way of saying average, and I know this formula here looks pretty crazy, but hey, that's what's given in the formula sheet, okay? So this E looking symbol here refers to the sum or adding things up. F means frequency and the X is our variable. In this case, it's our test scores. Since 37 here appears 2 times, F is equals to 2 and X equals to 37, so it becomes 2 times 37 plus 1 times 59 and so on. For the denominator is the sum of F, which is how many people are there in total, which is 5, and calculating that gives us the mean of 60. Remember our example of our histogram of people's GPA? Let's try to find the mean of this dataset, and we can start by drawing a table of the class interval, the frequency, and let's fill up the values over here. You can also start to notice that we can't really use the class interval as our X variable since it's a range of values. So we have to take the average between the minimum and the maximum, and let's create another GPA column here. Now looking back at our formula, we need to find the sum of F. So we can just add up these values here to get 32 samples. For the sum of fx, we need to create another column and multiply f and x together. And let's add up all of these values to get the sum of fx is equals to 103.2. Finally, we can put these two inside our formula to get the mean GPA of 3.23. You can think of median as the middle guy in a row of people. So for these 5 scores over here, the middle guy is this guy, and the median is equals to 59. Imagine we have another genius axolotl over here that gets 100 marks. And now it becomes a little bit more difficult to tell who is the middle guy. Is it this guy or is it this guy? So the solution is to take the average of these two numbers, which gives us the median of 68.5. From these two examples, you can notice that the method is different if the number of samples is odd or even. The general formula for finding the median position is n plus 1 divided by 2. So for the odd case, 5 plus 1 divided by 2 gives us the third position, and for the even case, 6 plus 1 divided by 2 gives us the 3.5 position. So we know to take the average between the third and the fourth guy. This question asks us to find these 5 unknown numbers, and since the largest is 4 times of the smallest, let's put this as 4x and this as x. Next up, the median is the middle guy over here, which is 10. Now, because we know that the mode is equals to 12, we know that it must appear at least 2 times. And the only way it can appear if these two values here are both 12. Since 4x is equals to 12, we can solve for the smallest value and we get x is equals to 3. Let's call this last value here y. And because the mean is 9, we can add up all these numbers divided by 5 samples equals to 9, then we can solve for y to be equals to 8. And there we go, we have all of our 5 numbers. Honestly, I think that the school system added this topic in math so that students don't end up gambling their life savings away. The probability of some event can be written as a number from 0, which means it's never ever happening, to 1, which means that it's a 100% chance of happening. So imagine we have 4 reds and 3 blues. So the probability of drawing a red is the number of reds over here over the total number of items. So it's 4 reds divided by 4 plus 3, which gives us the probability of 4 over 7. Now let's imagine if we take that red out, the probability of drawing a red actually changes, where now the number of reds is 3 and the total number of items is 3 plus 3 equals to 6. So the probability now for drawing a red is 3 over 6 and we can simplify it to half. There's also this other trick called the 1 minus something rule. So imagine if I have a 6-sided dice and I want to find the probability of not rolling a 6. So what I can do is I can find the probability of rolling a 6 first, which is 1 over 6. Now the probability of not rolling a 6 is just 1 minus 1 over 6, which is equals to 5 over 6. This can only work if all the events are mutually exclusive, because there's no way for you to roll like a 6 and a 5 together. And we are done with all of the lower secondary topics. Now it's time for you to get out of your bed and practice some math. I'm a big fan of Paradigm Math because they upload these Sec 2 test papers for free along with answers, link in the description. So I recommend you to try them out before YOLOing for your final exams. I hope during this exam you will remember the words of Axolotl Sensei and pass all your math exams with flying colours. Okay, now it's time for me to go back into hibernation until the next video. Take care and all the best.
One enemy remaining. Spike down, C. A.